Well, we've seen a number of high-profile mass shootings in the United States over the past few years. Can you tell me, though, what they all have in common? And I mean all of them. And the
I got this.
Okay. And the mainstream media has ignored this, which is not a surprise. They've ignored the link here. Can you guys tell me what all of these shooters have in common? No. It's not
Thoughts
the color.
and prayers.
No. It's not the color of their skin. It's not the color of their skin. No, it's not guns.
Toxic masculinity.
No, there have been white. So it's not the color of their skin. There have been white mass shooters, Asian mass shooters, black mass shooters. So it's not the color of their skin. It's not guns. It's not toxic masculinity. If you give up, all of the shooters were using antidepressant drugs. All of them. SSRIs. So why are these drugs still allowed? Why aren't they immediately banned and pulled from pharmacies? Why are doctors still prescribing them? Wouldn't it have anything to do, of course, with the biopharmaceutical complex, would it? The tens of billions of dollars that would be at risk if we actually expose this connection? Gun control advocates, of course, always jump all over these shootings to blame guns and gun manufacturers. We know that. They try to sue gun companies immediately. Politicians use these mass shooting events to curry favor with donors. We see that all the time, right? They fundraise off of this stuff. You get the emails, right? If you subscribe to any of these people, you get the emails. Another mass shooting. Send me campaign donations. And the cycle continues. But no one in Congress has addressed the real cause of these mass shootings, antidepressant drugs. Hopefully now they will, if we sound a loud enough alarm. A couple of people have been doing that. Our friend Dr. Pierre Corey, who's been a guest here on the show and friend of the show, points out that the FDA has been aware of these connections for years and has covered it up on purpose to protect big pharma. As the Midwest Doctor explains in his great Substack, I encourage all of you to subscribe. Midwest Doctor says this: let's look at these drugs more closely. And let me say this up front. A minority of people have a lack of methyl. See, let me just read this from. Once the first SSRI entered the market in 1988, Prozac quickly distinguished itself as a particularly dangerous medication. And after 9 years, the FDA had received 39,000 adverse events reports for Prozac, a number far greater than any other drug. This included hundreds of suicides, atrocious violent crimes, hostility and aggression, psychosis, confusion, distorted thinking, convulsions, amnesia, brain zaps. Yeah, brain zaps. Who knew that was a thing? A feeling that your brain no longer works right. Sexual dysfunction. Yeah, because that'll help depression when you're sexually dysfunctional. That's great. That's unbelievable. And it's unbelievable thing. And as David, we've talked about this here on the show before about these adverse events reporting systems, right? Which is very few of them are actually cataloged, right?
Right. Well, yeah, because it's like for a doctor to have to it's not set up so that I couldn't go in there and really fill out a form. And so doctors have to do it. And it's about a 45-minute to an hour-long process if they have everything that they need right then and there. So estimates are that 1% to 2% of everything is all that ever gets reported. So those numbers are never accurate.
Right. So it's unbelievable. Think about the fraction of these things that are never reported. Who thinks like after their son, commits suicide, let me call the adverse events reporting hotline.
Well,
right.
Yes, that's because only the pharmaceutical companies themselves are required to fill out adverse events for any pharmaceutical, be it vaccines or otherwise. And the manufacturers don't really track it. They send it out into doctors' offices and then they're like, good. They do not encourage doctors or any hospitals to report adverse events. So when this happens, doctors either take time out of their day to report these things, knowing that it will go into a black hole because many of them are never investigated. There just is no mandatory reporting for a pharmaceutical drug once it's on the market for a reason. Now, when you contrast that to mandatory reporting for infectious diseases such as COVID or other things like monkeypox, that absolutely is required of healthcare providers. Why wouldn't the government want adverse events from pharmaceuticals?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great point.
And also, if you're generally like with the vaccines, the mRNAs, you had to fight the doctor to even agree that it possibly was that. So they'd be like, no, we're not putting it into the VAERS because this came from this or this came from that. So it's like a lot of times the doctors themselves are on the dole and they don't want to go in and try to find what's actually happening, which, would be filling out VAERS and saying, okay, like doing the research and be like, oh, it did come from this, but they don't seem to care.
Right. As someone points out in the chat, Alex Jones has been a gatekeeper on this. He pointed out these connections 15 years ago. Of course, he was vilified for it. We're going to show you more people that were vilified for talking about it in here a second. Thank you for your chat there.
Well, and also really quick, I just want to also say, like, we see them talking about like going to war in Mexico. Like Lindsey Graham has been talking about that, some other senators and things, and it's over fentanyl. And they're like, the drug cartels are bringing in this fentanyl, but it's like, who does that lead back to? Who's making the fentanyl? It's not the cartels, it's the pharmaceutical industries. They're the ones making this stuff. They know what it's doing to people, so why do they still make it?
Right. And how does Congress allow it? So let's look a little bit more closely at these drugs. Thank you, Dr. Demi, for your $20 super chat. So let's look at these drugs more closely. And let me say this up front. A minority people have a lack of methylation or serotonin in their brains. And it was thought up until recently that the lack of serotonin leads to depression and that taking SSRIs helps to balance out this lack of brain chemical. But a vast majority of people don't have a deficit of this chemical in their brains. And furthermore, new research now shows this lack of serotonin has nothing to do with depression at all. The very thing these drugs are meant to address. More on that part of it in a second. So why are these things even allowed to be prescribed for that anymore now that we have the research, a voluminous amount of research on it? But many people use this chemical imbalance argument and they don't even know what they're talking about. And that's the problem. So in many ways, it's like saying that all fat people have glandular problems, right? Remember when we would hear that, when the truth is that very few people have a glandular condition that caused them to become fat. Most fat people are fat because they overeat highly processed seed oil-based carbohydrates. Turns out if you eat cereal and pasta and bread as a staple of your diet, you get fat. It's not glandular. So again, very few people have a lack of methylation. And new research shows that a lack of it doesn't even lead to depression. So these SSRIs that target this chemical are doing the opposite of helping you, as our friend Tucker Carlson explains.
What seemed like news to us, last week we learned that actually SSRIs don't cure a chemical imbalance in your brain. So the acronym SSRI stands for Selective Serotonin Reuptake Inhibitor. The theory has been for 30 years, that depressed people have an imbalance of serotonin in their brains. They have a chemical imbalance. If you give them more serotonin, then they become less depressed and happy. They're less likely to kill themselves, right? But it turns out that serotonin deficiencies are not the reason people get depressed. That's not just a guess, it's now officially science. This new finding comes from University College London. Just completed a long and huge study on the relationship between depression and serotonin. It was published in the journal Molecular Psychiatry. Here's what the lead author of that study, Joanna Moncrief, said about the findings. Quote, I think we can safely say, after a vast amount of research conducted over several decades, there is no convincing evidence that depression is caused by serotonin abnormalities, particularly by lower levels or reduced activity of serotonin. What? That was the whole premise of the drug, which virtually the entire American population was taking on their doctor's advice.
What? He says. What? So even if you don't believe the science that Tucker just spoke about, because a lot of people choose to ignore science, well, then you should maybe pay attention to the lawsuits. Maybe you're more of a legal person. You don't like science, but maybe you're more of a legal person. So where the drug companies during these lawsuits, these trials, being forced to admit that most people have totally normal levels or an abundance of serotonin. And when these normal people take SSRIs, it can lead to psychotic episodes, violence, suicide. This is well documented. The FDA knew about these adverse events as far back as the late 1980s and hid the findings. Why? Because President Bush Sr. and his family had very close ties to Big Pharma, particularly Eli Lilly, the maker of Prozac. The FDA hid it from you. This is criminal behavior, by the way. When will these people face prosecution? And we now know the drug companies hid it from you as well. They knew the SSRIs had intense adverse events in their clinical trials, and they hid it from the public. Why?
Of course they did.
Why would they do that? Like, does it have anything perhaps to do with money? Could it possibly have anything to do with money? Well, it turns out selling these drugs generates over $40 billion a year for these companies. $40 billion. And the only reason we know about these adverse events, is thanks to lawsuits that have uncovered the truth from these pharmaceutical companies.
Wait. But they're all facing bankruptcy. What does that?
What, Pfizer?
They obviously aren't making that good of money.
Well, apparently. Well, if they have any more of these lawsuits where people are aware of it, again, this is why you hide it, right? Because Pfizer could be facing bankruptcy now as a result of no one wanting to take their boosters. And the amount of money, I guess, they poured into these things, that's a big problem for them. So, yeah, I guess this is why you hide things from people, right? Because you don't want people to know about adverse events. Thanks to a 2001 trial, however, against Paxil manufacturer GlaxoSmithKline, we know they were aware of these adverse events. Again, if you don't believe the new research about serotonin, then you should at least want to know if you're deficient in this chemical, right? This serotonin. After all, that's why the doctor is prescribing it to you in the first place. You need more of it, so here, take this drug. The truth is that it's incredibly easy to test for this also. Like if you believe that a low serotonin level leads to depression, when we now know the evidence is against that, but even if you do still believe that, it's easy to test for it. The specificity of methylation or serotonin testing is 98% accurate. These tests are incredibly accurate, but almost no doctors do the test. Instead, they're just prescribing these drugs for teenagers who, by the way, are feeling like teenagers. Oh, you're uncomfortable in your newly developed body. You don't know who you are as a person. You got hair on your balls. Your voice is deeper. You got hair into your armpits. You're emotional. You're anxious. You want to snap at your parents a little bit for them telling you to put away your clothes. Everything a teenager is supposed to feel. That's all normal. That's what being a teenager is all about. Instead, let's mask this perfectly natural development and give them antidepressants, SSRIs, without testing their brain chemistry to see if these kids might have a psychotic episode or open fire to Walmart or even commit suicide. So don't even get me started on hormone blockers to top it all off of these kids turning into trans kids or giving kids testosterone.
Well, as Thomas Saz warned in his books in the 60s about pharmacracy, what we're doing is taking things and calling them diseases when they are not a disease, they are normal human discomforts. And so because he has the whole book, Pharmacracy, is how, there is no such thing as mental disease. A disease is a cellular disorder, right? Something is going wrong. And brain chemistry is not a disease. And when we call these things a disease, it leads to what turns out to be pharmacizing every single problem and handing power to the government and pharmaceuticals. This is what he warned about, and this is what we have. Yeah.
And not just that, but it's like the teachers have become the diagnosers of these things. Like I've seen several people that the teacher says that my child needs to be on, Ritalin or whatever. But it's like, if you're a teacher, you should understand kids just have energy. It's like they just want them to be drugged up, drooling, take their naps, be good little kids, don't act up. But it's like they're kids.
Well, and school counselors are now empowered to be able to do this, right? So, Billy is, he's acting like a teenager. Let's send him down to the school counselor. The school counselor then recommends going on antidepressants.
Well, they're sold this, again, as a mental disease or a disorder. And the same way we're told that obesity is a disease. It's outside of your control. It's a malfunction of the body.
So take a pill.
It really is not. And so all of this, you have to wonder, why does the media get so hyped up about telling you that they care about your mental health? That has a consequence of telling you that this is outside of your control and that there are organizations that you can hand this control to, which will make money off of selling you drugs.
Greg Strasser in our chat says, a lot of Ritalin is prescribed to children. Yeah, Greg, you're right.
Yeah. And we've seen, personally, when I was married, we took, and this was probably 10 years ago, my ex-wife's son went into a psychiatrist, and we went with him because we were talking about some behavioral issues. And the doctor's like, can I talk to him alone for a little bit? I was like, okay, so I left the room. And then not even 5 minutes later, he came out and asked us back in and said he was going to put him on Prozac. And I was like, you gathered that in 5 minutes? And so we've seen dope sick And in Dope Sick, we see that like these doctors are basically paid by the pharmaceutical companies in other ways to like go give speeches or whatever. They like get money for that. And I was like, this seems like if they can diagnose a kid to put him on that dangerous of a drug in 5 minutes,
wow,
like that's insane.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
And that's not testing any brain chemistry. That's just deciding like probably these levels are low. So let's bump them up and see with no pre-existing research about how it may interact with other things going on in a person's body. None.
Yeah, and I was livid because I was like, obviously you're getting some kind of kickback from this, the diagnosis in 5 minutes, and my wife's like, let's go.
Yeah, I mean, that's crazy. 5 minutes, and that kid needs, go get him on some drugs right now. So what I want to underline is what I just said. New research shows a lack of serotonin has nothing to do with depression. So then what exactly are they doing? Well, doctors point out that since SSRIs or antidepressants came out on the market, they have noticed an unusual connection. And it's actually pretty shocking here what this connection is. And if you want to see, basically to protect Big Pharma, that they've been knowing about this for many, many years. They've known about this. And again, we'll have more on that part of it in a second. So I want to talk about this, and I want to talk about how these connections are put together and how doctors point out that since SSRIs or antidepressants came on the market, we basically noticed this unbelievable connection between these drugs and out-of-character violent behavior, including suicides, murders, and large mass murders, which we might call, mass shootings. And because these drugs have spiked in usage, the mass shootings have increased as well. And all of these mass shootings have one common denominator, SSRIs. So take a look at this. This is the Palm Beach Post. They did a deep dive on these violent killings and SSRIs. And it's a pretty brave report, actually, for the Palm Beach Post. And they highlight a bunch of these different individuals who ended up carrying out mass killings. And they looked at 10 cases specifically. 18-year-old kills father 14 days after starting Prozac. And that's the Eli Lilly case, which we'll talk about in a second. And when they found, and basically Eli Lilly got off on this because he said, SSRI, that didn't have anything to do with it. Oh, really, Eli Lilly? Interesting. Columbine killers, Eric Harris. Batman killer in Colorado just got off Zoloft and immediately went on this killing spree. Australia bans the use of SSRIs in children after 18 until under 18 after their killing there. Ireland, the fatal stabbing linked to Celexa. And the list goes on and on. 12-year-old taking Zoloft shot his grandparents. 12-year-old on Zoloft. Australia man fatally shoots wife, daughter, 4 grandchildren on SSRIs.
Why is a 12-year-old on Zoloft?
Exactly. I mean, kids depressed at 12 years old, get them on drugs.
We certainly can't hope that we could help make him comfortable and mentally resilient.
No, of course not. So we got to get him on drugs.
I wonder how much that kid went outside, because you know how much outside can actually help that? Like we used to get locked outside. That was our drug. My mom would lock the door and say, don't come back till dinner.
Yeah, vitamin D.
Very anachronistic of you.
Yeah. Get out of here. Don't come back till dinner. As Tucker pointed out, these antidepressant drugs are everywhere. And that between 1991 and 2018, total SSRI prescriptions in the United States rose by more than 3,000%. The number of prescriptions for most common SSRIs hit 224 million last year. 224 million prescriptions in a country of 330 million people, according to the most recent census. So if you just wrap your head around that for a second, chances are just about everyone you know is using an SSRI. How many of you watching right now are using antidepressants? Or I'm just going to look at the chat here. Or just let us know how many of you are using antidepressants, or how many people do you are using antidepressants? Let us know in the chat. You don't have to be shy about it. We're not going to call you out about it.
No shame if you are. Yeah, no shame.
Yeah, there's no shame at all.
Yeah, and I think that, when I think about the conversation about antidepressants with people that I know that are in the medical field, it is baseline care. It's not like, can we get you to a point where you don't have this? It's like, let's start you here and then see if we can work you off, without much research on how to work someone off of that, how it counteracts with other drugs. There's just, it's used, again, a lot like these transgender hormones, kind of like a Clinique counters, like, oh, should we turn that shade of foundation up or down? Let's see how you're feeling, right? It's very imprecise science.
So nearly...
Well, and back when my kid, sorry, really quick, when my son went on those things, like against my wishes, his mom put him on him, and then he couldn't sleep because of Ritalin. So then they're like, well, then we gave him like clonidine or something like that to sleep. And they were like, you know, because it messed with his memory. They're like, if he takes 2 of those, it could kill him. So it's like, you know, you're giving a 14-year-old kid these drugs and expecting them to remember not to take too much. But it's like they keep adding on, like, oh, so you've got this. Well, let's counter that with this. And then by the end of it, you're on this whole smorgasbord of drugs to handle your depression, which makes it much worse in many cases.
And of course,
that happened.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No,
I was going to point out that. So,
go ahead.
Oh, there's a delay. So this happened to me when I was in middle school. They started me on Ritalin for ADHD, and then because of the effects of that, then I was taking lithium, and then I ended up taking Depakote because of the 2 of those. And Depakote is an antipsychotic, and all this when I was in middle school. And so when I was 18, I had enlisted. I was in delayed enlistment into the Army in the EOD program. So I'd got my spot there. I'd already been through like the MEPS and everything. And at the last minute, I couldn't get security clearance because I had taken an antipsychotic. And so because of that, like I ended up not having that military career. Basically, at that point, the only thing available was infantry, which I wasn't particularly interested in at the time.
Wow.
So that like just all of that just because of the drug cocktail that they put me through. That in the end, it was really just because I think about more than one thing at a time, and they didn't like that.
And I mean, look at that's crazy. How you can ruin a kid's life with that kind of thing. And then what we're doing now with these cross-sex hormones, which is incredibly uncomfortable for children and painful. And then, yeah, you could easily see someone like that being given cross-sex hormones or puberty blockers or what have you, all the psychosis that goes along with it, which usually is pre-existing. And then what you would need to sort of, I don't know, play a chemistry game with it otherwise.
A lot of our viewers, I'm seeing a lot of people in our chat room saying, no way, I would never touch this stuff. And there's just so many people saying, nope, I take walks, I meditate, I sunbathe, I go out in the sun, I get vitamin D, I take walks with my dog. No, 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 no. So that's amazing. So I'm glad we have such a, I don't know, maybe an enlightened audience here. And if you are on them, we should point out that, you know, again, doctors say you should never, ever go cold turkey because a number of these major violent incidents have happened when people went off of them immediately or when just on them. It happens like at the beginning or like they go cold turkey and they don't like wean themselves off. Now, we're not doctors, so consult your doctor if that's something you're considering doing again. But that's where a lot of these violent episodes have happened, almost all of them, when they went on them or went right off of them. So be very, very careful and consult your doctor. So nearly 70% of all Americans are taking antidepressants. 70%.
That is incidentally the same percentage of Americans that are overweight.
Whoa, perhaps not incidental, right? I mean, it's unbelievable. You become like sloth-like, I guess, you know?
And
70%.
the other 30% of us are just holding on to keep control of our bodies from the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry. Oh my gosh, you guys.
Where was the 30% in the movie WALL-E? We never saw the 30%.
Well, they maybe
robots
stayed on Earth.
So I was just going to say the robots.
So nearly 70% of all Americans are taking antidepressants. And suicide rates have jumped 35%. I'm sure there's no connection at all, but oh, wait a second. Drug makers are being forced to admit the truth. Eli Lilly, for example, hid documents during a 1996 murder trial. Those documents proved that they knew Prozac creates an increased risk of suicide and violent behavior for those who take the drug. That was the murder trial for Kurt Danish. Here's Kurt Danish. Here he was, 18 years old. He was 18 years old. He was given Prozac, and 17 days later, he shot his father, killed him, the person he loved the most in the world.
Jeez.
And he said he had no memory of the shooting at all. Then he went to prison for it. Yeah, he went to prison for it. And it was a 60-year prison sentence. It was a 22 to 60-year prison sentence based on whatever kind of behavior he had. Well, 26 years later, he's out of prison now, and he's on a mission to stop the use of these drugs. Here's what he looks like today. So he's out of prison now, and he'll be under probation till he's 78 years old for this, and living with a lifetime of trauma for what he did to his father. During the 1996 court case, Eli Lilly lied in court and claimed that Prozac would not have caused this aggressive behavior at all. And then he was convicted and went to prison for it. But they were lying, because documents then were revealed in 2004 showing Lilly had concealed data from 1988 showing that Prozac, in fact, did cause violence and suicide. So here's Kurt explaining now how if you're planning on taking these drugs, you should at least test yourself first. Watch.
Hi, my name is Kurt Danish. In July 2020, I was released from prison after serving 24 years for third-degree murder. In 1996, at the age of 18, I shot and killed my father while having a violent reaction to Prozac. I had taken the drug for 2 weeks when I stopped at cold turkey. In 2008, DNA testing confirmed that I am a poor metabolizer of Prozac. I was shocked to learn that hidden in the warning of the drug is the fact that 7% of the population suffer from a liver enzyme deficiency that increases the risk of suffering adverse effects from antidepressants, including violence. A simple DNA swab test can reveal whether you too are a poor metabolizer. I encourage everyone who considers taking one of these drugs to get tested before they take any antidepressants. If your doctor isn't aware of the test, educate them yourself. Nothing will bring my dad back or erase the guilt, remorse, and memories I live with every day. But it is my hope that my experience can be used to prevent future tragedy. Don't take my word for it. Do your own research. The risk is real.
So actor Tom Cruise, you'll recall, spoke out about these antidepressants with sexual predator Matt Lauer on the Today Show. And Tom Cruise was destroyed over this interview. Boy, did they come after him. Big Pharma really put the hurt on Tom Cruise after this interview. Watch.
Here we are today, where I talk out against drugs and psychiatric abuses of electric shocking people, okay, against their will, of drugging children with them not knowing the effects of these drugs. Do you know what Adderall is? Do you know Ritalin? Do you know now that Ritalin is a street drug? Do you understand that?
Aren't there examples, and might not Brooke Shields be an example of someone who benefited from one of those drugs?
All it does is mask the problem, Matt. And if you understand the history of it, it masks the problem. That's what it does. That's all it does. You're not getting to the reason why. There is no such thing as a chemical imbalance. Drugs aren't the answer. That these drugs are very dangerous. They're mind-altering, antipsychotic drugs. And there are ways of doing it without that so that we don't end up in a brave new world.
Do you guys remember that interview? He was vilified for that at the time.
I mean,
I was almost going to bring that up earlier. I didn't see it was on the rundown.
yeah. You're really, I was comfortable thinking that Tom Cruise was crazy up until now.
I mean, they barely painted him as crazy. Like,
Yeah.
can you believe this? He's talking against drugs.
Okay.
The attacks on
You're really
Tom.
busting my preconceived notions here.
Well, the attacks on Tom
You
Cruise
still
were.
got the Scientology thing, though, so.
Right.
Yeah. So the attacks on Tom Cruise were brutal after that interview, but he was right. He was simply saying that these drug companies are massively marketing to parents to give their kids antidepressants. Suicides up 35% since that interview. Again, 2004, it was revealed that Eli Lilly was lying in court. They knew these drugs caused suicide, violence. In 2005, there's now, because of that, I guess in 2005 now, there's a warning label that must accompany these drugs. And it warns users to call 911 immediately if they begin to, quote, act aggressively, or if they become angry or violent, and or acting on dangerous impulses, end quote. That's on the bottle now. Would you give that to your kids?
Well, a lot of people would, because if they're struggling or suffering and think their children are suffering, they're just looking for whatever help, and they're sold this idea that we can just change their chemistry and they will be more comfortable.
Right.
And so, yeah, you
Well, I mean, think about like when you
My
see
daughter-
pharmaceutical commercials on TV. Sorry, Philip. And they give this whole list of side effects at the possible side effects at the end of it, and like some of them are worse than anything that you're trying to get it to relieve. And people just like, yeah, I don't care. I'm still going to go take it because I want to relieve that one little thing.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, with my daughter, they had prescribed her an anti-anxiety medicine, and one of the side effects that were written on the bottle was suicidal ideation. And now, how are you going to take something for anxiety that's that anxiety-inducing? Like, she was so terrified of taking the medication for anxiety because of that. You know, it's like it just like what how can you prescribe somebody something that's one of the possible side effects is you know, like actually wanting to commit suicide. It just it just blows my mind.
I couldn't imagine giving that to my child.
Yeah, your brain is not a chemistry project to just like try things out in this way, you know, and that's essentially what we're doing is experimentation.
So in 2010, the FDA found that SSRI antidepressants are, quote, the most strongly and consistently implicated class of drugs associated with homicidal, physical assault, physical abuse, homicide, ideation, or violence-related syndrome. That's what the FDA found. That's according to them. So I'll ask you, when will these drugs be banned? The FDA tried to hide this from you. They now admit that these things lead to suicide, violent behavior, homicidal ideation, physical assault, physical abuse. When will these things be pulled off pharmacy shelves? When will Congress step in? Perhaps instead of fighting over gun control, which is what they do, they run to that, and they cover up and mask the real problem here. Perhaps if these drugs were administered in plastic straws, they might be banned. You know, or plastic bags. Then maybe they'd have an advocate in Congress. They could get Greta Thunberg to come in and say, these things are in plastic, so we got to get rid of them. Environmentalists might step in. But otherwise, right now, they're still on the market. And I guess the next mass shooting will have the same conversation. Or no, we will never have this conversation. We will never have this conversation because none of the network televisions people ever want to talk about it. It's not going to be on the Today Show. It's not going to be anywhere. 70% of all Americans are taking these things. So there's a lot of money at stake. They'll probably try to silence it. But I'd love for you guys to share this, segment out with people. And again, we are not doctors. We're simply journalists here, and we're presenting to you the research and what doctors are reporting and what the lawsuits are saying and what Eli Lilly is saying and what GlaxoSmithKline is saying in their own private documents and what the FDA is saying. You make your own determinations about that. And again, I want to underline. Like if you are on one of these drugs, please talk to your doctor. And if you want to get off those drugs, ask your doctor how to do it. And they'll probably tell you to do it slowly because, again, a lot of these violent episodes that have occurred when someone went cold turkey and stopped immediately taking them or went on them. And that's when these things occurred. So, again, when will these things be banned? Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.